Well, thank you everyone for joining us in the latest in the Miller Insight series online. And my name is Mark Catchlove, and I lead the Miller Insight Group. Thank you to all those that are joining us for the first time. And I just want to let you know who Miller are. We're a family of brands, and you can see them all listed in front of you. And all these brands design and manufacture products for places where people live, where they get healed, where they learn, and where they work. And very much today is focusing on work. And we're very honoured to have Hannah Wilson, who is DBA Program Manager and Reader in Workplace Psychology at the Liverpool Business School, part of Liverpool John Moores University. I'm going to leave Hannah to tell you a little bit of her background and what she does. Looking forward to a great session. Hannah, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Mark, for the introduction, and thank you so much for everybody being here as well. I'm really excited to talk about a topic that I'm really passionate about, but also it seems that a lot of people are passionate about and that we are definitely talking about more and more. So as Mark said, my name's Hannah Wilson, and I am a reader in workplace psychology. So essentially that means that I get paid to read, or really paid to do more research. And so I lecture and research around this area of workplace psychology, which is really that interaction of people, place and culture, and looking specifically from employees' experience and how we can create better work environments for our employees. As Mark said, I also lead the DBA programme here at Liverpool Business School. And so the DBA, for those who don't know, it's a professional doctorate, just like a PhD. However, it's practically focused on solving real world problems. And so really engaging with real world research. And so in summary, what that means about me really is that I really am passionate about research, and specifically engaged research that looks at improving and impacting on real life, rather than maybe more typical academic research that just sits in its academic realm, sits in journals. I look to really engage and create impact with my research. So it's really great to be here today to be able to disseminate some of the research that I have been doing over the last couple of years. So what I'm going to be focusing on today is in search of belonging, creating a sense of community at work. And so this interest really came to me, apart from, experiencing this in work myself, feeling a sense of belonging. During the pandemic, where we had this emergence of different ways of working, and especially the emergence of hybrid work models and that rapid change to working from home and that remote connectivity, that really has implications for that social spatial environment that we work within, and also how we start connecting with others and how we start feeling part of a community within our organisations. And so an idea around not just bringing people together, making them, work in the office all the time, but really how can we create bonds and quality relationships with each other so people feel like they belong within our offices and organisational environments. And so I wanted to start off with this quote by Rathan Harter, who said, "We are social beings and our need to be connected to others doesn't just disappear when we enter the office." And so we do have this innate need to belong, to be with others. Now, there's lots and lots of research around kind of general well-being within the workplace. However, there's very little regarding social well-being, which can lead to several disastrous, really, several negative outcomes for both the individual teams, but also organisations as well. And so when we lose our social connections or lose opportunities for social connections within workplace, that can have a negative impact on well-being. And we know that informal interactions are really important for people. It can increase happiness, and also it can really shape organisational culture, and also foster that sense of belonging, and hopefully as well enhance performance. And so it's really important to think about well-being beyond kind of general well-being, but really our social well-being. So I have been researching this for quite a while. However, a conversation with Mark kind of brought this opportunity about some research that Herman Miller have done around belonging at work and fundamental needs of belonging. And so when I was putting together my slides for this session, I thought, okay, let's go there and let's look and see and start with what they've talked about. So the report in 2017 identified that belonging, or this feeling of being part of a group, sharing common goals, experiences, challenges, is one of our 6 fundamental needs at work. And so when organisations can enable these connections and encourage people to, just highlighted here, socialise, when we can prompt spontaneous interaction and make all employees, both home and remote, feel at home, that's when we can really enable this sense of belonging. But as every good academic is, I started off with some theory. I jumped into the theory around this idea of needing to belong. And so one of the first ones that really I kind of felt strongly with was this idea of self-determination theory. So self-determination theory is actually a framework of human motivation. So what it says is that we have 3 fundamental needs that motivate us in general life. So this isn't just in work. And those three needs are autonomy, competence, and specifically for this conversation today is relatedness. And so all individuals have that fundamental need for relatedness and belonging with each other. I then came across another really interesting theory as well, which I really like the name of, the belongingness hypothesis. So this is the idea that individuals, again, need those close, and that's a really important word here, those close relationships with others, but also connectedness with larger groups as well. And so what we can start seeing here is that that need to belong is something really innate and apparent and quite strong within individuals generally. And that is something that we can also support within work environments. So the need to belong comes about when there is an occurrence of these 2 factors. So when there's a stable environment, so that we feel that we are part of a stable work environment, and also that there's concern for others' welfare, so that we are going to feel that we are being looked after and that we're cared for within our environment. So when individuals are in groups, such as in organisations, people feel that they need to belong somewhere themselves. So they want to belong, whether that be in teams, disciplines, we have this innate need to belong. But that doesn't automatically satisfy their need to belong. Organisations, we need to consider opportunities for interactions with others, but also the suitable kind of environments that support this meeting of our needs to belong for this to actually occur within. So thinking back, we need this stable environment and concern for each other's welfare. It's not just people in a room. So what happens if those belongingness needs are not met? So our unmet belongingness needs, there is a huge impact firstly on well-being. So when we don't have our social needs met, it can impact our general well-being. Also, unsurprisingly as well, feelings of isolation. We can feel isolated from the group. We can feel outside of the social milieu and not connected and part of being with others. This can therefore lead to kind of more significant challenges within teams or at organisation levels. So, for example, poor work behaviours. So, you know, there might be issues of conflict or here's an example of poor information and resource sharing. People won't be as likely to support and share knowledge with others on their teams or within the organisation. People can tend to be more reserved and sit more separate to others, for example. There's also an impact on organisational identification and impact. So if people don't feel that they are getting their belongingness needs met, then they can feel less connected to the organisation as a whole. It's not just, that they'll feel worse about being with their team or have this general feeling of unwell, but also they won't relate as well to the organisation. So there's issues around then organisational commitment and perhaps attrition. And you can see that lonely individuals are more likely to leave organisations, which therefore has a huge impact for organisations in terms of the cost of rehiring and all of those broader issues associated with attrition. And then finally, looking kind of at that really macro level, is the impact on the health of the organisation. So you can see that this unmet belongingness need for individuals can then trickle down through or trickle up through an organisation and affect different levels, so individual, team level and organisational levels. So when I was looking at putting the slides together for this, I was really thinking about this idea of belonging at work, but also what it means to not have those belongingness needs met. So I looked at Google. When I'm putting the slides together, I'm thinking also, how can I make these slides look attractive? And I love a good Google search. And what came up when I Googled belonging at work is this first image here on the left-hand side of the screen. So you can see here, and I really like this representation because you can see several small groups of individuals. So perhaps teams, disciplines, different sectors within the organisation. In these small, perhaps closer groups, they're holding hands, they're perhaps supporting each other, they're there close with each other, but also they're close to these other groups as well, and they are all kind of working beside one another, and you can imagine it being quite a nice, flowy environment to work in. However, when I looked at social exclusion, so when people feel that their belongingness needs are not being met, social exclusion at work, you can see the picture on the right hand screen where one person, they're quite hunched over, they're on their own, there's people discussing in the back, it's quite dark, they feel, I'm assuming here they might feel quite left out, and so this idea of social exclusion, often individuals don't become lonely by choice, it's through these actions or being made to feel that they sit on the periphery of things within an organisational environment, that they therefore find it really difficult to enter that social milieu of the organisation, which can perpetuate these feelings of isolation. And so when organisations have a breakdown in these common social structures that we want to enable within a work environment, this can put employees at higher risk of feeling this socially disconnected, which you can really see and kind of feel in this picture. And so social exclusion affects a wide variety of social, cognitive and behavioural outcomes for individuals. And so individuals commonly note and report this sense of detachment from others. They feel that sense of exclusion. However, there are things that we can do. So things called social inclusions, which can really counteract the negative effects of these social exclusions, these things that make people feel they sit on the periphery. So organisations can look at strategies for increasing social connections to help meet employees' needs. So we need to be thinking about what are those strategies that we can implement to support employees to feel that sense of belonging and feel connected, and so they don't feel excluded from work. So as I said, I came to this piece of research during lockdown. This topic became really, really apparent. We saw lots of news about, these different ways of working. In fact, I've got a picture here of my office during lockdown, which kind of formed some of the basis of what I was really interested in here is, do these different ways of working, and specifically working at my office desk, on my own. You can see here I've had a little bit of an upgrade. I now have my own office, which I didn't originally have. This was just in the back of the living room. But how did that influence my sense of connection? Was there any influence there? Or what were the things that made me still feel connected, even though I perhaps wasn't sitting with others within the work environment? So according to a 2020 study by Deloitte, nearly 32% of participants revealed that they felt lonely whilst working at home. And so, you know, that's a large proportion of workers. And isolation, even though it was necessary during lockdown, it does find to increase loneliness. So when we are isolated or excluded, we perhaps do feel this sense of loneliness or exclusion from the organisation and our colleagues. However, what I did find interesting is that loneliness didn't particularly increase during the pandemic. However, that's not saying that it's not a hugely pervasive issue in every area of our life. Elderly people, people feeling lonely at home, people feeling lonely with friends, people feeling lonely with work. So there's obviously something going on here that people feel that their belongingness needs are not being met. So just kind of trying to link some of the dots here, I looked at social connection. And so there's not this merely this need to be with others, but it is really to develop and maintain really close relationships with each other. So some really interesting research found that if we don't have a best friend in work, that we're less engaged with our work and the organisations. I mean, I can definitely relate to this piece of research because I have a best friend in work who I always want to speak to. And if they're not round, I always, you know, if they're on holiday, I always feel a little bit more lonely. Don't know if anybody else can relate to that one. But it is really about, it's not the quantity of relationships. We might have a lot of relationships with others, but it's about the quality of the relationships. You know, we might have those low quality ones with lots of colleagues and work, you know, we walk past and say hi, but it's really about that deep quality of relationships. And so I also want to mention, because I think this is a really important point, although the need to belong is considered this universal basic need for everybody, it doesn't seem to be consistent. And for some people, it may be more important than others. So there does seem to be this individual difference in belongingness needs. So for example, some research identified in 2025 that those, no, that's next year, that would be not correct, 2015, individuals who experience high levels of power, so those, you know, perhaps more senior in an organisation, or those who generally, you know, maybe manage other people who feel that they have those higher levels of power within an organisation, tend to experience lower levels of loneliness because they feel less need to belong. Perhaps they, you know, get that somewhere else, and it doesn't need to occur within a work environment. And also we have this differences in need for affiliation as well. So individuals will seek out opportunities to interact with others. So individuals high on need for affiliation will seek out more opportunities. However, those with low need for affiliation might not seek out as readily. And I noticed it in the chat box actually, because it pops up on the side of my screen. Somebody said 1 in 4 people don't have relationships in work. So this would be perhaps that they have a lower need for affiliation. So perhaps they don't need that, or perhaps it is because the workplace is an unstructured workplace and doesn't enable that level of connection. So I really came to this idea of loneliness. This keeps on popping up, and this is really when relational experiences are unsatisfactory. So we don't feel like our belongingness needs are being met, that we don't feel we have the social connections that we feel that we need, and so we might expect that when work environments enable social connectedness, so have social inclusions, employees will be able to develop these higher quality relationships and therefore might experience lower levels of loneliness. So that brings me on to this idea of workplace loneliness that I've mentioned quite a lot, that seems to keep on kind of reoccurring as an issue that we're facing in organisations because of these unmet belongingness needs. So the workplace loneliness is this idea of there's a psychological pain which has been related to experience of physical pain, of the perceived relational deficiencies in the workplace. And now this idea of it's the perceived relational needs, so the employee's perception of whether their needs are being met or not. And this is made up of two elements. And so emotional deprivation, so somebody feeling that they have a lack of close interpersonal relationships at work. So again, that quality rather than quantity. But then also you have the social companionship side as well. And so this is the adequacy of engaging in social networks in the workplace. And so you can see here how organisations do have a role in supporting employees to feel part of that social milieu, part of that social environment, to decrease and kind of positively affect people's experience of workplace exclusion and therefore workplace loneliness. And so it's really, if employees are not made to feel part of organisations, they may feel these feelings of social rejection and therefore have this reaction of distancing them from the organisation, but also from others within an organisation. And so both of these factors of loneliness, of specifically workplace loneliness, can have serious organisational as well as psychological wellbeing outcomes for individuals. So there's lots and lots of research around the impact of loneliness on employees. However, there's not actually a lot about what we can do about workplace loneliness. What are the things that we can put in place that can support improving or mitigating this experience of workplace loneliness? I also want to just touch on this idea of new ways of working. Because of this blurring of boundaries and because of the severity of the psychological and wellbeing outcomes, when employees work at home, we have noticed that the mechanisms of loneliness that occur because of the workplace environment not only impact work but also home life, and so it has kind of a trickling effect over into other areas of employees' lives as well. So that says that there's really big implications for organisations to kind of tackle this. With us in this new way of working, we really need to think about how we can support our employees so there isn't this impact on, you know, their home life as well as their work life. So what do we ask for? So this is looking at kind of lots of the conversations that are going on around community building, isolation and loneliness. Organisations, they're asking for a return to office. So for example, Amazon have just said that they want everybody back into the office 5 days a week, and this is largely due to wanting more kind of social connection and people to see each other within the organisation. Much of this is often put down to a lack of creativity, innovation, people not feeling they get what they need from work. So for example, Nike, they decided that everybody should come back into the office full time because there was a lack of innovation. However, if you look at other brands such as Lululemon, who are very similar models, they have people working from home and their creativity has shot up. So perhaps it isn't actually just about having people together. There's something more going on within connecting others and bringing them together. Individuals as well, asking for more autonomy in work, more social interaction, more opportunities for socialising, social cohesion and shared enjoyment. So what is something that we can do to support this? And just like in my title, I came to this idea of sense of community, something that we really see a lot suggested in articles, reports, in the news, that we should create this sense of community. However, really as little is known about what this idea of sense of community actually means, and the multifaceted nature of it. And so psychological sense of community, which is that theoretical idea, therefore has this underpinning description of what it is. So it's a feeling of being part of an interdependent community, a part of a larger, dependable and stable structure that meets key needs and a sense of responsibility for the well-being of employees. So there's lots of things going on here in sense of community, rather than just this idea of let's create a community of people, let's bring them together, and this will drive a sense of group cohesiveness. In a psychological sense of community, because that meets the needs of employees, it meets this idea of sense of belonging, meets the needs of that social connectedness, this can actually drive a sense of group cohesiveness, which introduces opportunities for group membership and supporting social needs. However, really little has been done about this, like in the academic literature. I was really surprised because we talk about it so often. Lots of research has been conducted in kind of areas like urban geography. So, for example, a lot of research kind of in neighbourhoods. So research in neighbourhoods where residents felt like their environment was of a really high quality, that they felt safe to walk around, that there was a collective self-efficacy and caring for others within the environment, actually report lower levels of loneliness. So you can see that when we do integrate some of these ideas of psychological sense of community, we can decrease workplace loneliness or decrease loneliness. However, this is really not being tested or examined within a workplace context. And so there's really opportunity here to understand more about what are some of the organisational strategies we can implement to create this sense of community and therefore meet belongingness needs. So just a couple of points here. This sense of community meets the needs of employees, and because it's introducing those opportunities for group membership. And again, if employees are not made to feel part of the organisation, they can again feel these feelings of social rejection, distance themselves. So you can see these repetition here of experiences that people feel if they're not part of this social structure. So I said that psychological sense of community is multifaceted, and what I mean by that is there's many elements that are important within creating this sense of community. So first of all, membership. So this is a feeling of belonging or sharing a sense of personal relatedness to others. So feeling a part of that group, feeling like you are a member of that group. There's also influence. And so this is a sense of mattering to the group, or being able to make a difference to that group, or the group mattering to its members as well. And so that group exists for a reason. There's a purpose and you have influence over that. There's obviously as well shared emotional connection, which is really important. So a sense of mattering to that group, so that the group care for you, care for your needs. You then also have the integration and fulfilment of needs, a feeling that a member's needs will be met by the resources received through membership in that group. So you will get those, that basic fundamental needs that we require through being part of that group, that it's not just perhaps taking our resources, it actually gives us resources. So they do a sense of community, or a psychological sense of community, provides a sense of responsibility for the well-being of the community and the members within it. And although there's research conducted in many different areas, such as looking at social climate or a really big one looking at the psychological contract. This really looks at the individual's perceptions of a social environment, whereas this sense of community examines the reciprocal exchanges between the individuals and the organisations. So what individuals give to an organisation and also what individuals receive from an organisation. So it looks a little bit more at a complex relationship. And so developing a sense of community perhaps can increase this social capital and therefore increase bonds between employees. And this creating a sense of community has been really suggested as important for organisations to tackle issues of workplace. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at that. I wanted to test it. Does this actually exist? And is this going to support employees in developing quality relationships and therefore decrease their workplace loneliness? So what I did is I conducted a survey of employees, and due to the deep nature of psychological sense of community and the time it takes for that to develop, it's not just, as I've said a couple of times, about putting people together in a room, because that seems to be the idea that a sense of community is. It takes a time to develop those social bonds. So I made sure that people had been in employment for at least 3 months. This was specifically in the UK. And I wanted to look at the relationship between psychological sense of community and whether that impacted levels of loneliness at work. I also looked at some things in the middle as well to see whether quality of relationships mediated the relationship and whether there was any impact on different people's need to belong. I then created a beautiful model, which I have to put out there because I think it's beautiful. However, it's pretty hard to read. So for everybody, I have put together kind of a simpler model for us all to be able to interpret. So what I found is that psychological sense of community had a negative relationship with workplace loneliness. So the more people felt this sense of community, the lower they experienced levels of workplace loneliness. And this was on both social companionship and emotional deprivation. So experiencing this feeling of a psychological sense of community can support individuals, employees' feelings of social companionship and also emotional deprivation. They're not going to feel as emotionally deprived. And interestingly, I found that relationship quality mediated this relationship. So this acted as a mechanism partially for people's reduced experience of workplace loneliness. So having this sense of community really enabled individuals to develop the relationship quality. It deepened and strengthened that relationship, and therefore people feel less lonely in work, which is amazing. So this really takes a lot of the research from workplace loneliness from the individual. So a lot of the research is about personality. Perhaps they have lower, need to belong. These factors to the responsibility of management and organisations. So the things we do as organisations to create this environment of belonging or this psychological sense of community can really lead to lower levels of workplace loneliness. And I think this is a really important factor, that we need to consider this at an organisational level rather than perhaps sending people on resilience courses or wellbeing courses to support these social exclusion feelings. And so individuals really are more likely to experience a sense of community when organisations put into place some more support mechanisms and recognise the importance of staff welfare more generally at that kind of organisational level. Also, work relationships don't just emerge from working with each other, but they do take time to develop and evolve. Therefore, organisations really need to create these opportunities. So being part of this psychological sense of community, which is really developing those deep bonds, needs to be enacted and identified with an organisation and not just expected to happen, essentially. It's not just about putting people together. It's about encouraging opportunities for people to work together in meaningful ways. So I wanted to take, as I said before, I like to look at engaged research and some practical implications from this. So what I wanted to do is look thematically about some of the things that we can do as workplace practitioners to support this psychological sense of community. What are some of the things that we can do to help meet those belongingness needs from our positions? And so primarily I split it up into two sections. Workplace leadership, so some kind of more general and broad factors that we undertake as workplace leaders, but also specifically drawing out these attributes that we can integrate into our workplaces that support psychological sense of community. And so I also looked at the affordances. And so this is the workplace characteristics that can foster positive social interactions. And so that's why it's a little bit of a bubble and crossed over, because it is still part of what we do. However, I wanted to pull them out so we could look at them distinctly from each other. And so I looked at the 4 different factors of psychological sense of community. So first of all, membership. So what are some of the things that we can do to create that sense of membership? So reinforcing our organisational culture. So people really feel that they understand and can be part of the organisational culture, that there's some kind of visual identity between individuals and the organisation. And this very much links with some of those interior office design factors. So having symbolism of the building and offices, having perhaps that brand value. I did similar research with students in my PhD and found that they really like to have things like hoodies. They like to have signage that they were part of LJMU, that they were connected to LJMU. So they really wanted some symbolism that they were part of the organisation. Another really interesting example was a law firm that I did a little bit of work with. And they were going to get rid of some of their old textbooks, you know, where they used to do all their research for the employees really felt strongly attached to these. So instead, what they did is they created a piece of artwork to put up in the social areas. And the employees really felt that that was a bit of their history, a bit of, you know, where they came from, and connected them as a law firm and their purpose. Demarcation of different use of space. So we all hate it when we walk into an office and we go, I don't know where I'm meant to be, where am I meant to socialise, where am I meant to sit? And so helping people feel like that they actually know where they are, where they're meant to be within an organisation. Home-like environments and providing choices that meet individual needs and tasks, again, making us feel like we should be there and that we're not actually in the wrong place. We then have influence, so being involved in decision making, feeling like they actually have a role in decision making of the organisation, having engagement with managers, being able to see them so they're visible, but also having communication from them. And also, really importantly, and especially thinking these new ways of working, what do employees want? Ask them what they want. Do they want office days? What office days do they want? Connection opportunities, well-being activities. What would support them and what is going to work for them? We all think, well, a lot of places put in pool tables or ping pong tables. Is that actually what employees want? Is that going to help them? So ask and engage with employees so they feel like they have influence over those decisions. Again, things like flexibility of the environment, so they can influence the environment they're in and that they have the opportunity to change it and work with it to what they're needing, what they require. Shared emotional connection. So this is a really important one. Valuing employees and celebrating their achievements. These things can be done like more in those virtual environments, perhaps, especially this one about virtual technology skills to enable connection. So Zoom skills. So for example, if I was looking down the camera here more than looking at my slides, that would enable more of a shared emotional connection. So some of these things we can enact perhaps more in our virtual environments that can really support the development of the shared emotional connection. The same interior office design. personalization, so that individuals can, share part of themselves, and that can help create conversations with others over shared interests. And finally, integration and fulfillment of needs. So feeling like that our fundamental needs are met. So things like comfort, coziness, also thinking about those individual differences in social connection needs. Interior office design. Obviously, there's things like collaborative space, social facilities. There might even be opportunity to have laundry facilities so people can do their laundry while in work rather than having to think about that when they go home. But also, it's really important to think about individual work and restoration space. So a really interesting book that I was recently passed by Simone Heng on loneliness, that there's a really important need for us to connect at an individual level with ourselves. We need to be able to connect with ourselves to be therefore able to connect with others, and so we need this space. So she recommends taking space out to do box breathing or those kind of things, but also we need to allow that space within the organisation so that people can go and get that space for individual connection to enable more broader social connection as well. And finally, it would be remiss of me to not mention how this would work perhaps more in a hybrid model. So I have touched on some of the factors that we can consider, but specifically in this research, although I didn't test it specifically, I did find that generally participants identified a high level of sense of community, which is really interesting because this research happened during the first lockdown, as far as I can remember off the top of my head. It's either the first or second lockdown, when most people were working from home. Nearly 60% of the people who completed the survey were working at home most of the time, between really 80 to 100% of their time. And so there must have been something that we were doing right at the time. While we're working from home, we were still able to create and maintain relationships. Perhaps some of those things that we've perhaps lost because we're now relying back on being back in the office. But there was lots of activities that I heard about that people were doing whilst we were not able to connect in person that could supported some of those psychological sense of community needs, those belongingness needs. Virtual connection also can give us a lot of the dopamine feedback, that pleasure feeling that we get, especially for that social connection, that shared emotional connection, but it doesn't completely replace in-person connection. So I really do think that there needs to be this balance of both to enable our belongingness needs to be really deeply met within a workplace context. However, hybrid working can also offer us the opportunity to get our connections from other places as well. So we can create better connections with family, friends, or in this picture, your cat, your pets. You can get some of those belongingness needs from elsewhere as well. And they're really important for us to remember as well, that we are humans with a wide variety of needs and not just within the workplace. So really, for us, the implications for us to get to this lovely picture here, we really need to be thinking of all these elements of psychological sense of community to meet those belongingness needs. That's all from me. Here's a couple of links that I know will be shared afterwards. But thank you so much for listening, and I'd love to hear any questions that you might have.
Great, thank you very much, Hannah. That's really great. I've made some in the notes here. I wanted to come back actually on the more senior people and that they feel more of a part of a community. Well, something was interesting, a piece of research that we did, which showed us that people come into the office for camaraderie. Mm-hmm. Only 12% of managers, but 24% of non-managers. So it's interesting, that kind of backs out that they've already built their network, I guess, a lot of people as well. Yeah. So, we should management, this is Darcel, and I think I'm clarifying the question quite, should management be responsible to create a sense of community for effective financial outcomes? Will it make a difference to the business? And that's
interesting.
And that
Okay.
also then, I'm going to add also the bit from Phil that says, I think balancing the needs of the business alongside the visible or verbalized needs of the employee is the issue here, basically keeping both happy.
Interesting. So I might answer the second one first. So the second one, when you look at balancing a psychological sense of community and creating that, it is actually about balancing the reciprocal needs of an organisation and an individual, because the organisation needs to create an environment that employees feel belonging within, but also employees want to contribute to that wider organisation. They want to feel that they are part of it and that they make a difference and a contribution. So there's really a reciprocal nature there. It's not just about focusing on what does the employee need, it's also about how the employee can contribute to the wider organisation as well. So it's really a reciprocal relationship, which is why it's a little bit more interesting to look at than developing a psychological contract or a social climate, for example. Going back to the first question as well, because we've got this reciprocal nature, and also people feel that they belong, they want to contribute to the organisation. And so what you'll see is, and I think I go back to the slide where I had about the unmet belongingness needs, that yes, there might be implications for well-being, isolation, but also team working behaviours, and which therefore kind of matriculate through the organisation and therefore can have implications for the organisational climate and how the organisation runs as a business. There can be implications for performance, sharing knowledge, and also, I mean, a very apparent one that's kind of looking at the financial impact is lonely individuals are more likely to leave the organisation, and they suggest that it takes about £30,000 to rehire somebody that same position with training and everything. And so there you have a very financial bottom line to having lonely employees and not creating this kind of opportunity for a community.
And to quote Burmeister and Leary again, they said that much of what people do is out of a sense of belongingness. And I think that you tend to, so I always say that I don't work for Miller Knoll, I work for my colleagues, and that's a different experience. So I'll get up at 3 a.m. to fly off somewhere for my colleagues. I don't do that for Miller Knoll, because Miller Knoll is an entity, whereas you do it for individuals. That's great. There was someone mentioned that a brand smell was pumped into a company's head office. Have you done anything around the psychology of smell at all?
Well, I haven't personally, but I know that there is quite a lot of research around it. There's also, for customers, for example, so certain shops will pump a specific smell in because that attracts people into the shop and to buy and stimulate. So I can very much imagine, those things. It's one of our primary senses, isn't it? So there's lots of research about things for our different senses, so colour and smell. But yeah, if you want to do some research on it, I'll do it.
Yeah, and it is about that symbolism that actually you kind of recognise things, and it becomes an. I'm going to say this sounds dreadful, a bit like going to Granny's house. You go to Granny's house and it smells like Granny's house, whether that's.
It's that home-like environment.
It's
creating and it's having those indicators of this is where I belong, I'm part of this environment, and having that as soon as you walk in. So a really nice example of that is an aeroplane company. In their entrance hall, they had part of an aeroplane, and so that people, as soon as they walked in there, they had the symbolism of, I know where I am, I know what I'm contributing to, and smell can be part of that.
Yeah, and that was British Airways. I used to be a tour guide at that site because I took so many of our clients. We did all the furniture there, so pretty amazing. Jeffrey makes an interesting point here. Thank you for the insights and sharing your research. Appreciate the practical implications. Do you have any insight on other potential moderators that could hinder company efforts which are outside the company's control, e.g. personal happiness, disposition? I find this highly valuable. I guess it's that, what is the company responsible for? What am I taking into the office as opposed to what I'm bringing home from the office as well?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So there is lots of research about some of the antecedents of workplace loneliness. And so things like personality, that's where a lot of the research actually lies, is there is relationships between these individual factors, which perhaps organisations don't have control over. However, we also have to think that there are these individual differences. So what can we do in our practices that can, meet all the range of employee needs? So we don't want, or I don't think we should have organisations where we all have exact replicas, because they're not innovative, they're not creative. And so if somebody does like to sit on outside of the social milieu, that's where they feel more comfortable. Well, perhaps that's okay, and perhaps we can just find other opportunities to meet their needs. And I think that's, we don't have to bring everybody up to the exact same level, because that's not who we are as human beings.
Yeah, and Jeffrey, I also wanted to say, I hate the term where it says bring your whole self to work, because you don't want all of me in the office. And I think that whole thing is, there are some bits I leave at home, and that whole thing, I think I've seen this whole idea is that we can't be responsible for people's outside work situations. However, if we are good buddies and friends, we might notice to be able to help some of that whole community. Is there any additional factors around the subject of neurodiversity as well and community?
This probably goes back to just what I said about individual differences. Again, neurodiversity isn't something that I specifically specialise in, but more around individual differences, and again, individual differences in requirements. So, for example, meeting and fulfilling needs. If we need to think about that, we have a range of needs when we have people with neurodiversities or even disabilities within the workplace. So how can we ensure that we meet those needs on a variety of levels? And so it's thinking about perhaps there's back entrances into offices, quieter staircases, that enable people with perhaps autism who don't like to walk straight into a busy social environment. There's a range of spaces and more restorative places which perhaps these people might experience. Again, things like noise and light, these are fundamental things that we need to meet in an environment for people generally. So if we meet the needs of people with neurodiversities, we tend to make the workplace better for everybody anyway. And so it's just thinking about what are the needs of our employees and how can we meet them.
Yeah, and I'm going to leave with a quote here from Alistair. Managers have just as much of an impact on people's mental health as their spouse, about 69%, and even more of an impact than their doctor, which is only 51%, or their therapist, 41%. And I always say that any of our fundamental human needs are met in three ways. The places that we work in, but it is also the people that manage us and the technology that supports us. If only place was the answer. It's not. It's a combination of all those things. Hannah, thank you very much for a fantastic session. I've really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Mark.